In an alternate history where the Nazis had won World War II, life in America was not what it used to be. The United States had been conquered and occupied by the Third Reich, and the people lived in fear of their new rulers. As a teenage boy, Jacob had grown up in this world. He had never known anything different, and so he had accepted his life as it was. But one day, something happened that changed everything. It was a dark and stormy night, and Jacob was home alone. His parents had gone out to a party hosted by their Nazi overlords, leaving him to fend for himself. Jacob was used to being alone, but tonight was different. There was something in the air, a feeling of unease that he couldn't shake. And then he heard it. It was a soft, almost imperceptible sound coming from somewhere outside. Jacob crept to the window and peered out into the darkness. But he saw nothing, only the rain lashing against the glass. He tried to tell himself that it was nothing, that he was just imagining things. But the feeling of unease only grew stronger. And then he heard it again. A soft scratching at the door. Jacob's heart leaped into his throat. He knew that he shouldn't open the door, that it was probably some kind of trick by the Nazis. But the scratching continued, growing louder and more insistent. Finally, Jacob couldn't take it anymore. He crept to the door and peered through the peephole. And what he saw made his blood run cold. It was a creature, unlike anything he had ever seen before. It was vaguely humanoid in shape, but its skin was slick and oily, and its eyes glowed with an otherworldly light. Its mouth opened, revealing rows of razor-sharp teeth. Jacob stumbled backwards, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew that he had to get out of there, to find some kind of help. But as he turned to run, he saw that he was not alone. There were more of them, pouring into the house through the windows and doors. They moved with an eerie grace, their slick bodies slithering over the furniture and up the walls. Jacob tried to fight them off, but it was like fighting a wave of darkness. And then, just as suddenly as they had appeared, the creatures were gone. Jacob was left alone in the darkness, trembling and gasping for breath. The next day, Jacob tried to tell his parents what had happened. But they only laughed and dismissed him as a silly child. They told him that he had imagined it all, that there was nothing to be afraid of. But Jacob knew the truth. He knew that the creatures were real and that they were coming for him. And he knew that he had to find a way to stop them. Over the next few weeks, Jacob threw himself into his studies. He read every book he could find about the Nazis' occult practices and the strange creatures they had summoned. And finally, he found what he was looking for. It was a ritual, an ancient ceremony that could banish the creatures back to their own realm. Jacob knew that it was dangerous, that it could even be deadly. But he also knew that it was his only chance. He gathered the materials he needed: candles, salt, and a book bound in human skin. He set up the ritual in the basement of his parents' house, far away from prying eyes. And then he began to chant. The words were in an ancient language that Jacob had never heard before, but he spoke them with confidence. The candles flickered, casting strange shadows on the walls. The salt formed a circle around him. As Jacob continued to chant, he felt a presence growing stronger around him. He could sense the creatures getting closer, drawn by the ritual. But he kept his focus, determined to see it through. Finally, with a burst of energy, Jacob spoke the final words of the ritual. The room was filled with a blinding light, and Jacob felt a surge of power rush through him. And then, as suddenly as it had started, the light faded away. Jacob was alone in the basement once more, but he could sense that something had changed. He cautiously made his way upstairs, half expecting to see the creatures waiting for him. But there was nothing there. The house was quiet and still, and Jacob realized that he had banished the creatures back to their own realm. For a moment, Jacob felt a sense of triumph. He had faced his fears and come out victorious. But then, he realized what he had done. By practicing an occult ritual, Jacob had put himself in great danger. If the Nazis found out, they would surely execute him for heresy. And even worse, the ritual had drawn the creatures to him in the first place. He had no idea what other dark forces he might have awakened. Jacob knew that he had to be careful. He couldn't risk drawing any more attention to himself, and he had to be prepared for whatever might come next. Over the next few weeks, Jacob kept a low profile. He continued to study, to hone his skills, and to watch for any signs of danger. But as time went on, he began to wonder if he had made a terrible mistake. The creatures never returned, and Jacob couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He couldn't explain it, but he had a sense that he had disturbed something far beyond his understanding. And then, one night, he heard a knock at the door. Jacob froze, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew that he couldn't ignore it, that he had to face whatever was on the other side. With shaking hands, he opened the door. And there, standing in the rain, was a man in a long black coat. He was tall and thin, with piercing blue eyes that seemed to see right through Jacob.
"Come with me,"
the man said. His voice was low and quiet, but it carried an air of authority. Jacob hesitated for a moment, but he knew that he had no choice. He followed the man out into the rain, feeling a sense of dread growing within him. As they walked through the dark streets, the man told Jacob about a secret organization. It was made up of people who had discovered the truth about the Nazis and their occult practices. They were working to overthrow the regime and restore freedom to the world. At first, Jacob was skeptical. But as he listened to the man speak, he began to realize that there might be hope after all. The man led Jacob to a hidden safe house deep in the heart of the city. There, he met other members of the organization, people from all walks of life who had banded together to fight the Nazi menace. Over the next few months, Jacob trained with the resistance fighters. He learned how to use weapons, how to infiltrate Nazi strongholds, and how to fight back against the darkness that had taken over the world. And finally, the day came when they put their plan into action. The resistance fighters launched a coordinated attack on the Nazi stronghold, targeting their leaders and their occult facilities. It was a brutal fight, but in the end, the resistance emerged victorious. Jacob stood among the ruins of the Nazi headquarters, feeling a sense of hope and possibility for the first time in his life. He knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult. Jacob and the other members of the resistance worked tirelessly to rebuild their world. They established a new government, one that valued freedom and equality above all else. But the scars of the Nazi regime ran deep, and it would take years of hard work to fully heal the wounds of the past. Jacob and his fellow fighters knew that they could never let their guard down, but they had to be vigilant against any attempts to resurrect the dark forces that had once ruled the world. As the years went by, Jacob continued to work for the new government. He became a respected leader, and he was known for his bravery and his unwavering commitment to justice. But even as he worked to create a better world, Jacob never forgot the horrors of the past. He knew that the darkness was still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for its chance to strike again. And so, he continued to practice his rituals, to study the arcane arts, and to keep his skills sharp. He knew that he might need them again someday, that he might have to face the darkness once more. But for now, Jacob was content to live in the light. He had fought the Nazis and won, and he knew that he had played a part in creating a better world for himself and for future generations. He looked to the future with hope, knowing that he had faced his fears and emerged victorious. He knew that the darkness was still out there, but he was ready to face it again if he had to. Because he knew that as long as there were people willing to fight for what was right, the darkness would never truly win.